So you wrote an article called Lucifer's Hammer, which
Yep.
or a blog post or whatever we're calling them nowadays, and that to me was the article. The first couple articles we talked about are more about identifying the problem and describing the problem, and then saying that this is the problem we're faced with, and here's why we're faced with it. But Lucifer's Hammer actually offers some ideas about changing the narrative. And so talk a little bit about what the main idea or ideas you were trying to get forth or get out there with Lucifer's Hammer.
Well, if you're of a certain age, right? So you might remember, I think it was Larry Niven who wrote Jerry Pournelle, other science fiction writers. We've mentioned a lot of science fiction writers in this podcast, right?
Nerd alert.
So they wrote a sci-fi novel called Lucifer's Hammer. It was about a comet striking the Earth. And then the post-apocalyptic world that came after that. And for whatever reason, it's one of those books you read when you're 13 or 14 and it hits you at just the right time. And what I remember about that book is thinking, this whole post-apocalyptic world, it doesn't sound so bad. Right? Which is what I think so many teenage boys or perpetual teenage boys, and I gotta admit, sometimes I still think, in the post-apocalyptic world, when that motorcycle gang, comes to take over my farm, here's how I'm going to defend myself, right? Yeah. And it's always terribly romantic and self-sufficient and meritocratic and
as soon as you start thinking that, read The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Right.
That's right. Exactly right. Cormac McCarthy is my all-time favorite author, and The Road is a hell of a book.
It's a love story, but boy, is it a tough love story. Golly,
it's a tough love story.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's a tough love story. But your point, the context of the love story, as you're describing, is what I think a post-apocalyptic world would be pretty much right, where life is nasty, brutish, and short, to quote Thomas Hobbes. So I think that in so much of the protest movement we have today, particularly the after hours protest movement of, the Antifa and the Proud Boys and the cosplay that goes on, right, with the urban protests and violence, is this. It's LARPing, right? It's live action role playing, right? That is not what the revolution actually looks like.
That's
right.
Right.
It's play acting. And it makes me so mad because it's play acting that is encouraged by political parties because they think that it would be a competitive advantage to put all of their effort and momentum into halting that cosplay, LARPing, urban violence. And it makes me really mad because if we get to a point where the real thing happens, we're going to learn pretty soon that that it is the road, right? It's not Lucifer's hammer. It's not this romantic libertarian, meritocratic post.
We're all communal farmers, and we all
exactly right. No, it's
5 pigs and all that sort of thing. That's not the way it turns out. It will happen.
It's not the way it ever turns out.
Yeah.
No, and you don't have to go too far back in history to get a lot of examples of that. So, you say, well, what can you do? What is the action that is required here? I think it is first what we're describing about thinking and just recognizing what's happening and the messages that are being played out to create that intellectual distance so that you don't find yourself, in a sense, aiding and abetting the violence part of this. But when it comes to action, I am an enormous believer in social change and not just veneer social change, but like we were talking earlier, blowing up, a lot of things, right? The rules of the game to get out of these cozy equilibria that don't allow for incremental change. So I'm all for political activism, right? And my vote is the merest part of my political life. So I do believe very strongly that in this world where narrative is so compelling and is so dominant, that nonviolence has never been more important in social activism. That it's not just, my view, the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do,
Yeah.
right? Think about that protest in Portland. It was a month, maybe 6 weeks or so ago, where the Navy vet, right, the guy wearing the Navy, the
Yeah.
big dude, he stands in front of the goon squad, right, and he takes a beating. He just takes a beating. And think about how powerful that was, right?
Yeah.
That this is somebody who believes in their principles. You know, he went there because he believes in imagine this, the Constitution of the United States. And he took a beating to show that. Man, that's a narrative that works. That's a meme that works. And so I think that when you kind of step back and you think about, well, what's the smart way to act and be a political activist in a world that's dominated by narrative? There are, two can play at this game of creating sausage, right? Two can play at the game of creating messages that resonate for the hearts and minds of other citizens. So that's what that article is talking about. It's and that's what I mean about taking action that doesn't fit with your 13-year-old boy romantic version of what being a rebel's all about. But I'm telling you, this is the way to win a political struggle and to be active political in the world we have today.